Alright, so let's get into this first. I'm going to start with the death of Bud Grant. Just makes the most sense to start with. Bud Grant, if you're not sure who he is, he coached the Vikings from 1967 through 83. He stopped coaching us for a year in 1984. I say us as in I was born back then. And then he came back in 1985 just because we had a different head coach that one year. I don't remember what it is, but it also doesn't matter. He was just that bad of head coach. It was like George Washington coming back for a second term in office. We were so bad that year, we had to bring in the master again. That's actually why George Washington also ran for another term as president. Fun fact. Anyway, so Bud Grant, he was the second Vikings head coach ever. I think we had one head coach from like 1961 to 64, 65. Then we had Bud Grant. Bud Grant was the king of the frozen tundra. He was the king of the frozen tundra that everyone thinks of when they think of Minnesota. The Vikings have played in a domed stadium ever since I think it was like 1983 when the Metrodome was built. Other than 2014-15 we played in TCF Bank Stadium. We've always played in a dome, but I'm pretty sure all of Bud Grant's coaching years we played in Metropolitan Stadium, which is also known as Met Stadium, which was an outdoor stadium. So basically throughout the winter he always coached when we were playing at home in the frigid weather of Minnesota. And also, fun fact, back then there were no heaters. Both teams shared a sideline, and because Bud Grant was the head coach of the home team, he didn't allow any heaters on the sideline, which meant that neither team got any heaters. Obviously today, you have like a bunch of heaters along the sideline in winter weather games, especially in stadiums like Kansas City or Soldier Field, Lambeau, Foxborough, Oxford Park. I'm not sure what this is called. Never mind. Orchard Park. Like stadiums that get really bad weather, they get the heaters, and they also have the super big jackets that you would wear to like Antarctica. But back then, Bud Grant never allowed any heaters on the sidelines because his entire philosophy was to build a team that was built for the cold north of Minnesota. And that's exactly what he did. He had built up the Purple People Leaders defense, which was basically just, first of all, it was one of the best defenses in NFL history. It's just a defensive line. The four main guys were Alan Page, Carl Eller, both Hall of Famers. Jim Marshall, the two-time Pro Bowler, not in the Hall of Fame, but he was a good player. And then like one other guy, can't remember what his name is, but it doesn't really matter. Below the four-star defensive linemen. Their motto was get after the quarterback. They were one of the best defensive teams ever. And they always were trained to play in the frigid weathers of Minnesota, led by Bud Grant, the king of the frigid north, the king of the frozen tundra. And this is also one culprit as to why a lot of people make fun of the Vikings for losing the Super Bowl 4 times. The Super Bowl is always played in a warm climate. Obviously, like Super Bowl 6 and Super Bowl 48. Those games were both pretty cold, but most Super Bowls are played in a warm weather climate. Like the last two were played in the Arizona, I think like the Cardinal Stadium, the Rams Stadium, then also in Tampa Bay, all warm climates. It might be, and one pretty recent one, the last like couple decades, was played in Indianapolis, but that's a closed dome. So they're always played in warmer climates because they want a lot of people to be able to enjoy it, and obviously to have a good football game to enjoy, it's got to be nice weather. That is not what Bud Grant built the team for. He built the team for super cold weather, and that's one reason why the Vikings always struggled in the Super Bowls, because they were built for the cold weather, had to play in warm weather. It's like it's like, this is a terrible analogy, but like a Minnesotan, that you always train for super cold weather, like being in Minnesota, go down to Florida where it's 80 degrees in the middle of January. It is not the same thing. I mean, also that analogy wasn't, but that's not. You can't play in that kind of weather. If like when Bud Grant built the team for that kind of cold weather, you can't play in warm weather and win in the Super Bowl. The Vikings never scored more than 14 points in the Super Bowl. I think like they played against the Raiders. They lost 33-14. That was the highest scoring Super Bowl they had. They lost to the Steelers 16-6. I think that was the closest Super Bowl. And then like the Dolphins and the Chiefs, they lost like 24-7, 23-7. I think. Not sure which one was which. But yeah, they never had a chance in the Super Bowls, even though the Vikings were favored against the Dolphins. Anyways, that's a little bit too much about the Vikings defense. This is like Bud Grant. He like lived for the cold weather. I'm pretty sure like always lived in Minnesota, so he just had that ingrained in his mind. Even one of the most viral moments of probably the most viral moment of his entire life, the 2015 World Card game, the Vikings versus the Seahawks at TCF Bank Stadium, -6-degree wind chill. He walked out with a T-shirt for the coin toss. He had a jacket, and he asked Roger Goodell to hold it for him while he went out to show everyone how much we love this weather. I know that's a terrible impression. Probably Kevin O'Connell could probably do a better impression since they look the exact same. I feel that they do. He wore a T-shirt in -6-degree weather for the wild card game coin toss because he wanted to show everyone how much the Vikings love this cold weather, because that was his weather. That was the weather for Bud Grant. He lived for the cold temperatures, and it's just crazy to think about. The Seahawks also once were warming up shirtless in -12-degree temperatures, which is also crazy. But yeah, Bud Grant was Minnesota Vikings legend, our greatest coach we'll probably ever see. I don't know if I'd put him probably as one of the greatest coaches of all time, as he didn't win a Super Bowl, but he was definitely the greatest head coach in Vikings history. Probably will never be a better one than Bud Grant, and he'll definitely be a Vikings legend. He will live on in the Vikings folklore forever. Anyways, let's get on to some player cuts, some bit later stuff. It all started, the first news that I heard about was with Eric Kendricks getting cut. I saw it because I think I heard about the Vikings posted a video of like a career tribute to Eric Kendricks, like his 8-year stint from 2015 to 2023. He was always like always like a top 5 middle linebacker in the league. He was the best coverage linebacker for years. He was always up there like a tier 2 behind guys like Bobby Wagner and Luke Kuechly, who were always just the best. He always stayed high up there, one of the best coverage middle linebacker in the league. He was one of the first guys that I really liked watching, since the second year I was watching football was his rookie year. I started really watching the Vikings football in 2014. He was drafted in 2015. So I always got to watch him along with Harrison Smith. Like, those were like 2 cornerstones of the Vikings defense for years. We had our star safety Harrison Smith and our star linebacker Eric Kendricks alongside Anthony Barr, who was like not as good Eric Kendricks. And obviously this is part of the Vikings trying to cut down on their salary cap, because I think the Vikings are still several $1 million. I think we started like $20 million over the cap. So we're starting to cut several players, which we'll also get into later. And Eric Kendricks, he wasn't the same player last year that he had historically been for most of his career. And he's partially just because he's getting older, so he's just not as good. He was always like one of the best coverage linebackers. I actually heard, Pat Warner, probably the best coverage linebacker in the NFL today, his coverage grade I think was like 85. Eric Kendricks was 49. So it was bad. And the previous years, he was also up in like the 80s, 70s, and 80s, maybe even the 90s. But he definitely lost a huge step. And I'm sorry to see him go because he was always one of the Vikings' best players. He was great in coverage. He always I think he led the team in tackles like several years in a row. He always a star player. But I'm gonna now move on. No, I don't have much more to say. Move on to the reason why I wear my Adam Thielen jersey for this video. The hometown kid, the Detroit Lakes, Minnesota State Mankato graduate. Always lived in purple and yellow because Mankato State is also purple and yellow. Adam Thielen, the guy who worked his butt off to make it to Minnesota State Mankato, Minnesota State University Mankato, and paid his own money to go to a regional combine to make it on to the Vikings as an undrafted free agent. Was on the practice squad for a year in 2013, and then he made the team in 2014 as a special teams specialist. Like, he was actually elite on special teams. He had a blocked punt against the Panthers, which later led to us winning like 31-13, and then also in 2015 a converted fourth down fake punt run to Adam Thielen. He was on the right side, cut up to the left, and ran for like 30 yards. It was a really long gain. So then the following season, 2016, he had his first big year. Had 967 yards, but though he was like super quiet because he was this undrafted free agent guy, no one knew who he was. No one knew who he really was still until he really like became one of the best receivers in the NFL. A couple years later, he had 1,276 yards in 2017 and 1,373 yards in 2018. That was probably when he first finally showed how much of a stud he is. And I loved Adam Thielen. At first I always loved Diggs. He was my favorite player for a long time, but I started to like Thielen more as the Minnesota hometown kid, and he was just better than Stephon Diggs. But yeah, he was always like the Vikings' just best receiver. He was, as I say, one of the most sure-handed receivers in the NFL. He would catch like everything that got within his fingertip range. He made some of the sickest one-handed catches you'll ever see. He would always make great catches even in coverage along the sidelines. You could fire it in there. If it touched any fingertip, he was coming down with the ball. He was just that good. He had that good of hands. And yeah, he's obviously a hometown favorite. But the way he left was honestly pretty sad. It all started after the Vikings lost to the Giants in the postseason. Just a terrible game to watch. Our offense was fine. Our defense was just terrible, allowing Daniel Jones to score 31 points on us early on in that game. He averaged like 18 yards per attempt, and he threw like 80% completion percentage, so basically every throw, it was almost guaranteed a first down. And we also couldn't stop Saquon Barkley for the life of us. After that, Caitlin Thielen, his wife, posted on her Instagram story that their time this season and with the Vikings might have been coming to the end, and that was like just hinting at the fact that he was gonna leave. First of all, his wife got like way too involved in this. She was like becoming the star of the show. But even Adam Thielen, later, saying that he wanted a bigger role in the offense, which, I mean, his role was what started diminishing ever since he got injured in 2019. He didn't have a great year then. 2020, he got, I think, just short of 1,000 yards, so he had a decent year then. But 2021, 2022, he, I think, had like, I can't remember what it was. I think he had less yards than KJ Osborne both years, so he was already starting to turn into more of a wide receiver 3, with KJ Osborne starting to replace him. And he wanted a bigger role in the offense, something that he was not going to get, just because he had lost a step, wasn't as fast. Still a great route runner, great catcher, but just wasn't the same player. And then also, his wife, again, Thielen, said he wanted to be somewhere where he actually felt appreciated by the fans. No one appreciated him. No one will ever appreciate him more than Vikings fans. No one will. He grew up in Minnesota, played at Minnesota State Mankato, made it as a UDFA practice squad player, made it on the team the year later, and always played for Minnesota. No fans will appreciate him as much as the Vikings fans will do. The only reason he feels that is because he developed an ego as his role in the offense was diminishing after he worked as hard as he could to make it as an undrafted free agent who became a huge star. His role in the offense started diminishing. He somehow feels like he'll be more appreciated somewhere else, which is just baloney. He's not. No team will love him as much as the Vikings will. In fact, as much as like I love Thielen, and I think probably like the best thing. I feel like I'm starting to get such hard feelings with him. I still love Adam Thielen. I have his jersey. He's a Viking legend. I feel like the best thing he could do just to secure his legacy would probably be retiring. But he's probably gonna make it to another team, getting like $2 million a year when he wants 16, and as a wide receiver 4, getting 400 yards per year. But I mean, I hope he can. I definitely hope he can still find some success in the NFL. But the way he left and how selfish he was, Diggs when he was leaving the Vikings was not fun to watch. But I still love Adam Thielen. He's a Vikings legend. Always played in Minnesota. UDFA practice squad player. Just the way he left was just terrible. Anyways, I'm gonna move on to the last story. This is probably my saddest one to see, other than Bud Grant dying, as he's the biggest legend of any of these guys. Cornerback Cameron Dantzler. He drafted by the Vikings in 2020, and he was the Vikings top corner alongside Jeff Gladney, who they were both just terrible their rookie year in 2020. The Vikings had a terrible defense. Ironically, the Vikings were statistically the best. I mean, in the last 3 years in 2020, we had the fourth best offense in terms of yards, at number 10 for points, and even our defense was ranked 24th. It went down to 27th in 2021, and our offense just went way down, even though it seemed like a nicer year for some reason. I don't know why. Probably because it was 2021 and not 2020. 2020 was just a terrible year, especially with Tom Brady winning the Super Bowl. And then 2022, the Vikings go down to the 31st ranked defense. And I think our offense, I mean, obviously we had new guy, we had Justin Jefferson and T.J. Hawkins that are really popping off. I know Justin Jefferson had popped off ever since his first game as a rookie, but he won the Offensive Player of the Year. And T.J. Hawkinson continuing to shine in a new offense. I'm getting way too much into the Vikings and Cameron Dantzler. Basically, Cameron Dantzler, the reason I'm kind of sad to see that this was because obviously he was terrible his first year, 2020. 2021, he was still meh, behind Patrick Peterson and Bashad Breeland. I've never hated a Vikings cornerback more. Pretty specific, but he was so bad. It was like watching Xavier Rhodes, 2019 Xavier Rhodes all over again. It was so painful to watch. And but then finally we had Cameron Dantzler really getting into his own in 2022. Really improved a lot in coverage, and even though he's super tiny, he's like more skinnier than me. I'm 5'10", 135, and yet I probably weigh more than Cameron Dantzler. Not literally, he's probably, but he looks so skinny if you look at him. He's just, and yet he was a really physical corner. All of our corners were great for tackling for some reason. I mean, obviously the Vikings had like one of the worst tackling teams in the NFL, but like once our corners got their hands on a guy, it was probably more likely to see like Shannon Sullivan get up to a guy or Cameron Dantzler get up to a guy, grab his arms, run him, and he was going down more than like even guys like Harrison Phillips, Darius Smith, Danielle Hunter. Although Danielle Hunter did make the stop on 4th down against the Lions, or even like Harrison Smith, Cam Beasley. Like watching those guys, the corners were for some reason like the best part of our tackling defense, even though it was really bad. They were like the most sure, like if they got their hands on the ball carrier, they were going down, especially like Shannon Sullivan and Cameron Dantzler and like Caleb Evans too. Those are all guys like they got to a guy and they were pulling him down. That sounds a bit weird, but you get my point, I think. And then Cameron Dantzler, he got injured, not sure which games, but I'm pretty sure he was pretty on and off this last year. He was great early on. He started to doze off later in the year, same as Darius Smith. And Duke Shelley started to take over for him. Duke Shelley, the 5'10", 100-pound star cornerback from Chicago. They tried using him as a slot cornerback, which he didn't do well. He played on the outside amazingly somehow. He was even like, I think he had the 3rd ranked coverage grade by PFF for cornerbacks, behind I'm not sure what the number 1 and number 2 guys, like it was Sauce Gardner and PS2 Patrick Surtain. Those 2 guys were better than him. Only those 2 guys than Duke Shelley. So then, I mean, seeing Cameron Dantzler go, I mean, he probably wasn't gonna, realistically, it's sad to say, but he was probably not gonna add much to the defense next year. Now that we do have Duke Shelley, hopefully Caleb Evans and Andrew Booth Jr. improve, and as long as if we do still have Patrick Peterson, he was our best corner. He was one of the best corners in the league actually last year, which is weird to say that one of the Vikings corners was one of the best. We haven't had that since Xavier Rhodes in 2017. Again, I'm most sad to see him go because he was such like a rising star this last year that he played in Minnesota. But I mean, the Vikings had to cut a lot of guys, and he was just part of it. Cut some guys to save on cap space. Not that we're probably not gonna do as well next year as we did this year, or we're gonna do way better. Probably one of the two. But I think that's probably where I'm gonna end the video. So yeah, don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, hit the bell, comment the videos you want to see, and as always, don't forget the Vikings will always suck, and Skull Vikings.